Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to introduce this next presentation. All I know about management, all that has really guided us in GeneXus to understand people and organizations and behaviors is owed to Mr. Adizes. He has an institute called Adizes Institute, and I have a great honor to introduce Johan Adizes, who's his son, and he will tell us about this institute. Thank you.
I really want to appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak before all of you and the invitation from GeneXus and from Nicholas. Oh. So I want to recognize you with this gift. Thank you very much. It's a bell. It's a symbol that we use for organization systems. So I hope it brings you organization and systems to your organization and to your life.
Can I use it in GeneXus too?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. It's open.
I also want to recognize all of you. I know there's many other meetings, and when I looked at the list, I said, maybe I'd like to go to these other meetings myself. So I want to recognize you for coming here amongst all the other opportunities that you have. I also want to recognize, I think in the group here we have Carlos Valdessuso, who came here from Brazil, and he's been working with Adizes in Brazil for over 40 years. So I want to recognize him, who's come here to listen to a lecture that he's probably heard over 1,000 times. And also Juan Jose Avenida from Argentina, who's also working with Adizes in Argentina. So thank you for coming for the lecture. What I'm going to be talking about today is obviously the future of management. And before we dive into this, what is the future of management, let's first understand, why do we need management? And I ask that question a lot of times to rooms full of managers. It says, why do we need management? And I get a silence in the room. I says, some say, we need to make money. We need to organize things. So why don't you set up a business model so you're making money, and then go retire to Hawaii, collect your dividends, and live a happy life? Why do we need management? Because management is not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process. If we have to organize things, okay, organize it, retire to Hawaii. Why do we need management? And the answer is because there's change. If you set up a business model today and retire to Hawaii, tomorrow your clients, their needs will change. Your employees will change. They'll quit, or they'll need something new in their life, promotions or something. Their needs will change of your employees. The government will change. The socioeconomic environment will change. And really what management is about adapting our organizations to better reflect the changing environments in which we operate. So why do we need management? Because there's change. If there was no change, we wouldn't need to manage. That's kind of the premise I want to get into before we get started. And what I'll be talking about today are just these 5 subjects. I'll start with, what causes change? Let's understand what is causing change. And then let's understand, why is the rate of change accelerating faster and faster? Once we understand why is the rate of change accelerating, we'll look into, what does that mean to us as managers? What can we do about it? And then finally, we'll take a look at, what is the future of management? So I'll be going and answering these questions. Let's start with the first question. What causes change? When I ask this question, I often hear technology, email. But when I think about it, I just can't see how email is making things change faster. Okay, there's more communication, but how does it really result in change or in faster change? So my illumination on what causes change came when I was thinking about a bus. I thought, if I depend on the bus to take me to work, and the bus changes its schedule, there will be change in my life. If I don't depend on the bus to take me to work, maybe I drive myself or something else, and the bus changes its schedule, it means nothing to me. There is no change in my life. So what causes change? It's dependency. If you depend on something and it changes, there's change in your life. If you don't depend on something and it changes, there is no change in your life. Let's take an example here. Let's say you decide to move to this Guru Rinpoche cave in Bhutan, which is kind of a monastery up in the mountains. In this monastery, there is no internet, no real society. They live off of let's assume, a lifetime supply of rice. Who do they depend on, the people who live in this cave, in this monastery? Very few things. What is the rate of change? What is changing if you lived here? Very little. Now realize that you will still age. Why will you age? Because there is dependency among your internal organs. So there is change internally, but externally, in the outside world, every day will be very similar to the next day. Let's move on now to why is the rate of change accelerating? Well, yesterday, our farmers were very self-sufficient. They grew the food they needed to live off of. They made their own clothes. He makes his own clothes. He raises his own livestock. Who does this farmer depend on? Very few things. Maybe the seasons. He depends on the seasons, and that's really the only change that's taking place in his life. What does this person look like today? Totally different style of farming. Let's just start with the gas that this person needs to run the tractors. How many people do we depend on to get us our gas? From digging it out of the ground, to refining it, to transporting it, to getting it into our machinery. Hundreds, if not thousands of people that we depend on. Not to mention the people who built these machines. Not to mention the people who maintain these machines. These guys are also dependent upon every other farmer who grows this same crop around the world. If for some reason many farmers grew a lot of the same product, the price of that product will drop. Change in this farmer's life. So what does this mean? If we depend on one thing or a few things, what are the chances that those things will change? They might change, but the chances are smaller than if we depend on thousands of things. The more things we depend on, the higher the chance one of them will change. Do you see that? So now let's go into why is change accelerating? Let's go a little bit deeper here. Because not only are we dependent, so I depend on somebody, they depend on somebody else, and they depend on somebody else, and they depend on somebody else, and eventually it makes a big circle. We are not just dependent, we are interdependent. What does that mean? It means when any one of these things change, it creates a wave of change across the whole system. Interdependency exponentially increases the number of things we're dependent upon. Does that make sense so far? Why is the rate, what causes change, and why is it accelerating? because of this concept of interdependency. So what does this accelerated change mean to us? Well, it means two things. Let me explain to you one of the basic concepts of the Adizes methodology, which is called the change loop. What we say is that when there is change, it causes problems and opportunities. Take a look at any problem or opportunity in your life, and you can identify something that has changed. Since we have some time, let's go a bit deeper here. Why does change cause problems and opportunities? It's because every system, like I'm a system, is made up of subsystems. I'm made up of organs, and my organs are made up of cells. And then if you're a biologist, you go all the way down to the atoms and forever. Also, an organization is made up of subsystems, departments. Your car is made up of subsystems. Every system is made of subsystems. And when those systems change, those subsystems change, they change at different speeds. Let me give you some examples here. Typically, when an organization is young, when it's first founded, the first department to grow is sales and marketing. Bring me money. Production is not developed very fast. Sales and marketing grows faster than our production or our delivery function. When this unit, sales and marketing, grows faster than our ability to produce and logistically deliver, what ends up happening in this gap? Late delivery times, poor quality products. Sales is over-promising, unhappy customers. Do you see that? If they grew together, or if there was no change, we wouldn't have that problem. The problem was that one unit grew faster than the other. Let's say we get ourselves a wonderful production facility. So now they're aligned, even room for growth, for more sales. What's the next problem? Our human resources function has not even been born yet. Which means, what's the problem there? We're not hiring the right people. We're not training them correctly. Maybe we get a great human resources person, but then our finances is still in infancy, which means we're doing all of our accounting on a napkin. We're doing all of our finances on a credit card. Now we're paying 30% interest rate. We're not collecting money on time. When the different subsystems change in different speeds, it results in disintegration. They change apart, which we see in the form of problems. What do we do with those problems and opportunities that come from change? Well, isn't that what management is all about? We have to manage our problems by reintegrating, right? What are we doing when we manage? What we're actually doing is creating more change. We are creating our own change. We are changing our organization to reflect the changing environment in which it is operating. It's like adaptation. We're adapting ourselves so we better fit our environment. What would happen if for some reason we were unable to manage at the same rate our world is changing? Something happened here and there's a big X and we're unable to create change. Will our problems go away? Will they disappear? If we ignore them, will they disappear? No. Our opportunities will become problems, and our problems will become crisis. That's Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State for Nixon, I believe. He said, "A problem unaddressed is a crisis in waiting." Realize that this can happen in two ways. One way is, for some reason, our management system doesn't work, and we're unable to change. But there's another factor here. Maybe our management system works fine. We're doing great, but something else happens. the rate of change starts to accelerate. And that's what we're seeing now in our globalized, highly interdependent world. The rate of change is, because of interdependency, is changing so fast, it's changing faster than our ability to manage it. We're unable to traverse this loop fast enough. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means two things. First, there's a threat. The threat is that we have more problems that are more complex. Why more problems? More change, more problems. But why are these problems more complex? They're more complex because we're interdependent. A long time ago, when we were not interdependent, if I had a problem, I could solve it. I made a decision and I implemented it. I didn't depend on anybody else's cooperation. Today, because of the interdependency, we start to depend on more and more people for their cooperation. Just think about it. A long time ago, if I was a manager, we were highly vertically oriented. I own my manufacturing. I own my distribution. I own my marketing. Nowadays, my manufacturing is done in China. My distribution is in Europe. My raw materials are coming from a different company. I don't own all of these different subsystems. I am dependent upon them. I can't just tell them what to do. I need their cooperation. The more people whose cooperation you need to solve a problem, the more complex that problem is. Why? Start with the basics. You need the cooperation of 10 people to solve a problem. Just scheduling those 10 people to have a meeting is complex within itself. Then you get to the meeting, and every individual has their own self-interest. What is good for them is different from what is good for you. They have their own understanding of what the problem is. They might even have their own language. We might have language problems. Really, there are 7 sources of conflict that I won't go into today that make decision-making amongst a team difficult. And I think everybody here who's ever been in a meeting will recognize that. Meetings are difficult. There's a lot of talk, hard to get people to take action. That's the complexity I'm talking about. The more people whose cooperation you need to solve a problem, the more complex that problem is. So that's the bad side of interdependency. And we can see that today. We can see crisis everywhere. We have obesity crisis. We have education crisis. We have environmental crisis. We have terrorist crisis. But that's the threat. There's also an opportunity here. What is that opportunity? The opportunity is technology. All of this technology here was not invented by some genius. Steve Jobs did not invent if Steve Jobs was born 100 years ago, he would have never invented the iPhone. My uncle is a computer scientist, and he teaches computers. And I asked him, Uncle, can you build a computer from scratch? You know, you're a teacher. You teach people how to build computers. He told me, nobody can build a computer from scratch. Nobody can build an airplane or a space shuttle from scratch. How are these things built? It takes a community of interdependent people to build these things. And how is somebody able to develop the different components? It's because the person who developed the transistor that goes in the iPhone, they didn't have to worry about raising their children, about growing their own crops, about making their own clothes. Somebody else did it for them. What interdependency allows us to do is focus. It allows us to focus on one subject and develop that subject. And if it wasn't for interdependency, well, I would never have been able to come here and give this lecture and think about these things. I would have been too busy, raising crops or livestock, feeding myself. So all of this technology, all of this increased in our quality of life is a result of this interdependency. So what's happening? Because of accelerated change, our quality of life is going down. Life is not as good as it was 100 years ago, and you hear this nostalgia everywhere. Life was better in the past. We didn't have so many problems. True, we had a higher quality of life, but a lower standard of living. We didn't have the ability to fly across the world and to space travel and all these computers and Netflix. We didn't have that. So again, lower quality of life, higher standard of living. That's what it means for us. What can we do about accelerated change? Well, there's two things we can do. One thing is we can build the wall. What does that mean? Stop the interdependency. Right? We can say, you stay over there. We don't want to depend on you. We don't want to buy your products. Just stay away. We're going to build the wall, and we're going to live in our own little shell. Cuba is kind of an example. They didn't build a wall. I guess a wall was built around them with the embargo. But you can see in Cuba, the rate of change has decreased significantly. And some might argue that life is better there. They have less problems. People are better taken care of in Cuba, as opposed to the United States and other Western countries. They don't have the same terrorist problems and disintegration. True. But they also don't have the innovation that we have. They don't have the new technologies. They're kind of stuck in the past. Well, that's one option. We can build the wall. What's another option that we can use? We can adapt faster. How can we adapt faster? In order to explain this, I'd like to use Mother Nature as a model. You can learn a lot from observing nature. And a billion or a few billion years ago, the earth was populated exclusively by single-celled organisms. That's all there was. And over time, these single-celled organisms started forming communities. They started getting together, and cyanobacteria is an example of one of those communities of single-celled organisms. And eventually, over time, what happened was that the different cells in the cyanobacteria started specializing, creating interdependency. You see that? You see it right here. This is from this website, and they're saying is that one cell out of 10 will differentiate into a different type of cell. And then they will supply their neighbors with fixed nitrogen in return for the products of photosynthesis. You see this? Interdependency. What I create, you need. What you create, I need. They start specializing. Here's another example, slime molds. These are communities of single-celled organisms that work together in times of crisis to find food and to procreate. What happened when these, let's say, couple 100,000 cells got larger and more complex with more interdependency? These communities of single-celled organisms started facing the same trouble that we are facing right now. Because of that interdependency, and it got so complex, the rate of change was changing faster than their ability to manage it. What did Mother Nature do to overcome that problem? Well, it evolved. We evolved from communities or organizations of single-celled organisms into multi-celled organisms, the plants and animals you see around you today. What was the difference? What's the difference between a community of single-celled organisms or an organization of single-celled organisms and a multi-celled organism? It's really just a change in consciousness. An organization of single-celled organisms, like the slime molds, each cell is an individual. It sees itself as an individual. It's me first, not the organization. It's like I'm not a part of something bigger than myself. I'm myself, and at times, I cooperate when needed, when it meets my own needs. While an organism, a multi-celled organism, each cell recognizes that it's part of a bigger system. In fact, that's what makes you who you are. Now we're getting a little philosophical, but who are you? You're not your cells because your cells have changed over your lifespan, right? Who are you? You're not your material possessions. You're not your thoughts because you think in your native language, which is something that came from somewhere else. So who are you really? Who you are is that consciousness that every cell in your body has, that I am not me. I am part of a bigger entity. That's who you are. And when you lose that consciousness, you will die. And when you die, you will lose that consciousness. That's really who you are, is that common consciousness that every cell in your body has, that it is part of a bigger system than itself. So what we're saying is, this is where I introduce the I role of management. Many of you might know this PAEI. In Adizes, we call them the 4 roles of management. I'm going to summarize it for you now if you've never heard of it. One role of management, if you're a manager, is you've got to make sure that you provide for your present needs of your clients. If you don't provide for the needs of your clients, they're going to stop buying from you and you'll go bankrupt. But that's not good enough. Many organizations do a great job at making sure their clients are happy, but they still go bankrupt. Why? Because they don't do it efficiently. They waste resources. Their costs are much higher than their revenue, and they go bankrupt. So not only do you do the P role of management, provide for present client needs, you also have to administer your organization. You have to, that's the A role of management. You have to make it efficient. You have to set up standard operating procedures. You have to do accounting to identify where you're wasting money so you get rid of waste. If you don't do that, you can go bankrupt. But that's not enough, because now I'm going into the E role of management, which stands for entrepreneurship. Not only do we have to provide for present client needs, we also have to provide for the future needs. We have to think about, how is our market changing? What will the future bring? And we have to start acting today in light of what we believe tomorrow will bring. We have to constantly adapt our organization because of change. That's the 3 roles of management. And I think that most managers really understand those 3. The one that is less clear is this I role of management. The I role of management is to create that common consciousness within the organization, is to make that evolutionary leap from a community to an organism. Now, before we go too far down this path, I want to make it clear that the act of turning an organization into an organism is really the task of God. That's nothing that us mere mortals will be able to do, because face it, we're all different individuals. But that is the horizon we're shooting for. And we can't forget our need to go towards that horizon. That's part of your job of management. You're never going to get there, but you must continuously move in that direction, because the natural entropy, the natural path of things, is in the opposite direction. Things naturally fall apart. People naturally take on their own self-interest. So we must continuously develop this culture of we're in it together. We must continuously change our organizational consciousness from mechanistic to organic. Let me explain mechanistic versus organic. Let's take this chair. This chair right here, if for some reason this leg were to break, could I still sit in this chair? I can't. Do you see that? It would fall over. Why doesn't this leg here, recognizing that the other leg is broken, move to the center of the chair so I can still sit in this chair? Why doesn't it do it? Because this chair has a mechanistic consciousness. It's as if this leg here is saying, my job is to carry the weight from there to here, and I'm doing my job. What's the problem? It doesn't recognize that it's part of a bigger system, mechanistic consciousness. Now look at my hand. If I break one finger, I still have a hand. 2 fingers, 3 fingers. 3/5 of my hand is broken, I still have a hand. Not only that, but my fingers will heal themselves. Here, to fix this chair, somebody from the outside will have to come in and move this leg from there to the middle, while my hand will heal itself. Without me even being conscious of it. It'll happen while I sleep, while I think of something else. That's inorganic consciousness. So again, mechanistic consciousness is the machine. It takes people from the outside to fix it, while the human body, or any of God's creations, are organic consciousness. They heal themselves. And that's really what the future of management is about, in my point of view. It's about creating these organic systems that heal themselves. Let me explain this in a more down-to-earth kind of way, because I think we're too high in the sky with organic consciousness and mechanistic consciousness. Let's get down to where the wheels touch the road. What does this mean? And we call it the future of management. We call it organizational transformation. And really, there's 2 definitions of what I'm talking about. One is, what's the function? What does it do? The other one is, what does it look like? What is the form? Let's start with the function. If you have an organic consciousness, the function that it will give you is, it will allow the organization to proactively and constructively identify and address its own problems and opportunities without outside intervention. Nobody from the outside needs to come in to fix the problem. The organization is able to do it on its own. Let's take this back to the human analogy so you can see what this looks like. Recently, I went through a big change in my life. That change was flying from Los Angeles to Montevideo. When I flew here, I was exposed to new viruses, new bacteria, new bugs in the air, bugs in the water. My body, which is a problem, right? It's a problem for my body. My body is dealing with that new environment, fighting off all of these new things it's not used to, without me even being conscious of it. Because of this organic consciousness, it's dealing with it internally, which leaves my higher level consciousness open to deal with bigger changes, external changes. Do you see that? I'm not worried about all these internal problems. So that's what we're talking about here, creating an organization where the organization itself is solving its own problems. Some of you who might have know something about Adizes, you might have seen the documentary one of our clients made about working with us. They did it as sort of a thank you to us, and also, because I asked the CEO, I said, that's nice of you to make this video, but why would you make a video promoting us? He says, 2 reasons. One is a thank you. The other one is any new employee, we want them to understand our value system. We want them to understand what we're trying to create here. And in that documentary, the manufacturing facility of this client company was hit by a hurricane. This is in Mexico. And the entire place was flooded and covered in like 4 feet of mud. The next day, without any instructions from management, all of the workers showed up with shovels, buckets, and their wives and their children, spouses and children. Nobody told them to do it. They did it on their own. And while all the other facilities in the neighborhood took months to get back online, they were able to do it in weeks. Why? Because they were able to proactively identify this problem, address it, without management telling them and saying, hey, you have to come to work tomorrow and bring buckets. They did it on their own because they were conscious of the fact that they weren't just doing their job. They were part of a bigger system. And if that system falls apart and is unable to operate, it would be bad for everybody else, and they would lose their jobs or there would be problems for them. They recognized that they were not just themselves, but they were part of a bigger system. Let's look at what does this look like. Let me just check my time. What does this look like? Back again, what we're saying is our ability to traverse this loop. That's what this is. Can we do this on our own without somebody else coming in to fix it? And what this looks like is a culture of mutual trust and respect. I know this is a little bit of a leap in our logic here. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but the bottom line is, in our experience, a company or an organization with mutual trust and respect is able to traverse this loop, is able to accomplish this. If you're able to do this, it means you have mutual trust and respect in your organization. And if you have mutual trust and respect, you're able to do this. They're opposite sides of the same coin. And that's really the secret of success. I mean, take a look at who is successful. What countries are successful? Why is Japan successful when it has no natural resources, or very few, just the ocean, fishing? While Angola, which has diamonds and platinum and great land for growing crops, why are they not successful? Where are they on the economic scales of things? Nowhere. Why is Switzerland an economic powerhouse with no natural resources? Mountains, not even good land for growing crops. All they have is snow. Economic powerhouse. While Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, has fallen apart. It's because of mutual trust and respect. In Japan, they have a culture of mutual trust and respect. In Switzerland, they have Germans, Italians, and French living together. They've been at war for hundreds of years. But in Switzerland, they respect their differences. Do you see that? What is Switzerland strong in? It's strong in pharmaceuticals and banking. Would you buy pharmaceuticals from a company you don't respect? Would you put your money in a bank you don't trust? What are they selling? They're selling their culture. And it's that culture which allows them to traverse this loop and solve their own problems. What happened in Yugoslavia, where they had Orthodox Christians, Catholic Christians, and Muslims living together? There was no trust and respect. In fact, when you're an Orthodox Christian and you go visit a Muslim village, you bring your pigs with you. So they run around and stop them from building another mosque. True story. And I'm sure it's the same way in the other direction. No trust and respect, which stops them from traversing this loop, which kills their ability to solve their own problems. So it's all about this culture of mutual trust and respect. So what are we talking about here? Let me slow down a little bit. We're talking about the future of management. What I'm saying is that due to higher rates of interdependency, which is creating accelerated change, the job of a manager is not just to provide for present client needs, and it's not just to make sure we're doing it efficiently, and it's not just to be entrepreneurial. A big part of your job as a manager is to create this culture of mutual trust and respect, to create this consciousness that we are all in it together. How are they related? Look, trust, why do we need trust? Because as different individuals, we have our own self-interest. By definition, every individual has their own self-interest. If you find two people with common interest, say thank you, because it's very rare. Typically, we have different interests. In the long run, you might find common interest. But today, here and now, we have different interests. When we have trust, what it does is it allows us to overcome our different interests because we trust in a common, long-term, common goal. If we have that, then we can overcome that conflict of what's good for you is not good for me. We can move forward and traverse this loop. Why do we need respect? Because everybody has a different opinion. In fact, there's a Chinese saying, if two people think the same, one is unnecessary. We want to surround ourselves with people who have a different opinion from ourselves so we can learn from them. But if we don't trust them, we can't learn from them. You see that? Now, you can tell how healthy an organization is by its body language. In an organization where there's no respect, when we're making decisions, when we're talking, I turn my back to you. You're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about, and I don't listen to you. Now it comes time to implement the decision made. If I don't trust you, what am I going to do? I got to watch you. Now, who's my back to? The customer, the client. In a healthy organization, when it's time to make a decision, we communicate with each other. We look at each other. We talk. Now it's time to implement. And we trust each other. What happens? I can turn my back to you. I can face the market. Organizations without trust and respect are unable to identify and address their own problems and opportunities without external intervention. And by the way, I see that as a consultant. We get calls from companies for a request for a bid, and we go up against a McKinsey or a Boston Consulting Group. And what the problem that the organization has is lack of trust and respect. The problem is not lack of solution to the problem. You have 10 managers in the room, they're interdependent, they all have to cooperate to solve a problem. What ends up happening is the challenge is not lack of solution. The challenge is too many solutions. Everybody in the room has a different solution, and they can't agree on a common solution so they can move forward. That's the challenge. Now, what do? They go and they hire McKinsey so that McKinsey will tell them what to do. Now, instead of having 10 different solutions, they have 11 different solutions. You see, they had to depend on outside intervention. What happens to that 11th solution? It just muddies the water. It's one more solution that we can't agree on. Your job is not to find the solution. Your job is to align the people around a common solution. That's what I'm talking about, the future of management. And more importantly, create the culture where they are able to align themselves without any outside intervention. And by the way, I am outside intervention. So how do you get yourself out of the picture? How do you make yourself redundant so they don't need you anymore and they're able to align themselves? I have 15 minutes. Let me go into the how. What does this look like? How do you create this culture? And I'm going to use the analogy of cooking an apple pie. Creating this culture is a lot like cooking an apple pie. The first thing you need when you're cooking an apple pie, or baking an apple pie, is good apples, good ingredients. If you have one bad apple, it can ruin the whole apple pie. What does that mean in an organization? Your apples, your ingredients, are your people. If you have people that can't be trusted, can't be respected, maybe because of some childhood problems and trauma, they can contaminate your entire organizational culture, the organizational consciousness, because they're just looking out for themselves. Now, obviously, we don't hire people like this, but many organizations have people like this. Why? Something else is taking place here. They're adapting to their environment. We'll just realize that the typical example here is like your computer programmer. I know we have a lot of them in the room, but there's kind of a stereotype. Really good with computers, really bad with people. So what do you do with somebody like that? Or like a salesman, very good at sales, but they make everybody mad in the organization because they're only looking out for themselves. Well, if you can't get rid of them, you have to quarantine them. Let them work from home. Don't have anybody reporting to them because they can contaminate your culture. You still need them, but you want to make sure they don't contaminate your culture. What's next? We can have good apples, great ingredients, but our recipe is broken. We put too much salt or too much sugar. That will ruin our apple pie. That happens in many organizations. That is the managerial process, which is how do we go about identifying and addressing our problems and opportunities, making decisions, communicating those decisions, following up on those decisions. That's the managerial process. That's the recipe. In some organizations, the people get together and they all scream at each other. That's going to be bad for mutual trust and respect. Bad for this common consciousness of we're all in it together. We're part of the same organization. Other organizations, the top manager makes all the decisions in a vacuum, doesn't talk to anybody, just tells them what to do. People feel helpless. I have no say in the company. I don't know where it's going. I'm just a soldier. Nobody's asking me for my brain at all. I've seen this happen in some organizations, and there's a term for it. It's called malicious obedience. You didn't ask me for my opinion. You're telling me what to do. What you're telling me to do, I know is bad for the company, but I'm going to do it exactly as you told me to do it because you didn't ask for my opinion. Malicious obedience. And then it's disaster, and then what happens? You did it wrong. Well, you didn't ask for my opinion. Loss of trust and respect. Other companies, they get together, they talk about their problems openly, they're very nice to each other, but nothing happens. They're unable to align and do something. They're unable to deal with the conflict inherent in change. They start losing trust and respect in themselves, saying, this company will never change. They start feeling like they're no longer part of that company, because who wants to be part of a company that can't change? That's the managerial process, the recipe. Now, I could have a good recipe and good ingredients and still ruin my apple pie. Let me explain. I take my apple pie and I put it in the oven, and I set the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the correct temperature. I don't know what it is in Celsius, but that's correct. But my oven is broken, and it's actually at 550 degrees. What's going to happen to my apple pie? It's going to get burnt, right? That happens in many organizations. We have good people. We have a good managerial process, but the organizational structure is broken. What is the organizational structure? The organizational structure defines who is responsible for what, who has authority over what, who can make what decisions, who can spend what money, who can use what capital equipment, who can tell who what to do. That's your authority. And the last piece is your reward. Imagine if you are responsible for $1 million in sales, but you have no authority. You can't sign any contracts. You can't drive the company car. You can't even represent yourself as a VP of sales. You have no title. I can't do my job. And I'm getting paid on salary anyway. How long before I say, hey, I can't do my job, I'm getting paid anyway, I'm just going to do nothing and sit on my hands? What happens when one person feels like, I can't do my job, I'm just going to retire on the job? That's what it's called. Everybody else sees them and says, well, if he's not going to work, I'm not going to work either. And now we start disintegrating. There's some other things here. For example, what you want to do is make sure the right people have control over the decisions in the organization. Let me give you an example. Have you ever heard of the title Director of Sales and Marketing? It's very common, right? When you're in charge of sales, and sales is short-term oriented. Do you see that? We measure sales in how much did you sell this month. Well, marketing is long-term oriented. Next year, what are the new markets? What are the new opportunities? If you combine short-term and the long-term orientation of the company in one individual, what will they focus on? Short run or long run? Short run, right? What happens to marketing? Marketing becomes sales support. All they do is make brochures and material to help sales sell. What happened to your long-term orientation? You don't have it anymore. You see that? Same with production and R&D. There's a lot of examples like that. What happens now? You're my head of sales and marketing. I'm the CEO. Who has control over the short-term, long-term orientation of the company? Do I have control? I might think I have control, which means what? I go to you and I say, hey, you're doing your job wrong. I want you to do it this way. I want you to focus on. Now I'm micromanaging you. How is that going to make you feel? Are you going to feel like you're part of a bigger system and you're not just an individual? Is that going to help create this organic consciousness? No, you're going to feel mad. Why doesn't he trust me? Why is he always looking over my shoulder? He's given me a job to do. Let me do my job. Because structurally, who's running the short-term, long-term orientation of the company? It's not the CEO. Who's doing it? It's de facto by the structure. The structure is killing that long-term orientation. So how you structure your organization is very important. Let's keep on going with our analogy here. We are making an apple pie together. We have good ingredients. We have a good managerial process. And we have a good structure. So let me go back. We're making the same apple pie. We have good ingredients. We have a wonderful recipe that we got from the best chefs in Europe. We have a good kitchen with a good oven. Everything works fine. But in your mind, you are making the apple pie for the Queen of England. In my mind, I am making this apple pie for McDonald's. What happens when this apple pie comes out of the oven and falls on the ground? I'm going to pick it up, cardboard box, next customer please, right? What are you going to say? Forget about it. Start all over again. We need a new apple pie. And not a cardboard box. I want a gold plate with ice cream and flowers. What's happening here? We don't have a common mission, vision, and values. So what am I trying to tell you here? When you look at management, most people are focusing, most management consultants, most books on management are focused on people. This is your Myers-Briggs, your DISC. We have our own management style indicator thing. We're all focused on people. What we're saying is that people are a product of their environment. They're a product of the system. And it's easier to change a person's environment and watch them change than to try and change people and expect them to change their environment. That's the bottom line. We are more focused on this. Now realize, in a small company with 5, 10 people, the people are everything. There is no environment. There is no system. But the bigger the organization becomes, the less important the people are individually and their styles, and the more important this system is. So we're focusing on these things here. Let's take this back to our human body analogy. The people are the cells, right? If you have a cell that's only looking out for itself, what do we call that cell? Cancer. That's what cancer is. It doesn't serve the totality. It's only looking to procreate and serve itself. What's our managerial process in our bodies? It is our nervous system. It's what communicates. We have a problem, and then we move our muscles to solve that problem. Structure. Every cell knows its job. It's not like one of my heart cells decides that it wants to start making decisions because it wants to be a brain cell. Every cell knows its jobs. And finally, it's not like my hand has a different mission in life than my left hand or right hand. If you have that, then that's psychology. You're going crazy, right? We have one mission, one vision that we're going after. That's an organic system. So what I'm saying is the future of management is to focus on these 4 factors so we can create a culture of mutual trust and respect, which will allow us to accomplish this. Proactively and constructively identify and address our own problems and opportunities without outside intervention. So now finally, in conclusion, the rate of change is accelerating. Why? Because of higher rates of interdependency. We depend on more things now than ever before. And that's both creating an opportunity and a threat. The world is circling faster and faster, creating more problems that are more complex, but also giving us technology and a higher standard of living, which is a good thing. We have 2 options. One is stop change, right, which is really just burn it down. But what is the economy? The economy is a measurement of our interdependency. A healthy economy is a measurement of how money's moving around, how fast it's moving around. That is a measurement of our interdependency. We can slow down the economy, or we can learn to adapt faster. And in order to learn how to adapt faster, we can look at Mother Nature and the way that it made this transition. And obviously, we're never going to get there. It's a horizon, but that's the horizon we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to reach, which is an organic consciousness, and that organic consciousness will allow us to traverse this loop faster than we are now. It's a new management paradigm. And that will result in, and the way we can do that is by focusing on people, process, structure, mission, and vision with an eye on culture. So invest in your culture, not by talking about it, not by putting words up on the wall, but by focusing on those 4 factors. And that's really what my whole lecture is about, and that's the future of management as I see it. Thank you.